players should you pick up before week 4 of the 2024 fantasy football season? What's going on, football fans and fantasy freaks? It's Mitch back here with another week of must-adds. These are the players to target on the waiver wire at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. Every position, I've got you covered in this video. If that sounds good, Gronk spike the like button. Don't forget to subscribe for weekly must-adds on OwnersBox Fantasy. And let me know in the comments if you have any fantasy football roster questions, trades, ads, drops, anything. Let me know in the comments. And let's get started with the position and the player, most importantly, that I want to target. I told you last week, Jawan Jennings was about to go off. Jawan Jennings is good at football. Just because he's looked at as the 4th receiving option or the 3rd wide receiver in San Francisco doesn't mean he's a legit baller supreme. Jawan Jennings is a dog. He's a good football player. And what did he prove? That he's a good football player. And he's more than a secondary wide receiver. This is a wide receiver 2 on most football teams, and he's currently outperforming Brandon Ayuk, the guy that got all the money, the huge contract, because right now, Brandon Ayuk, he's out to lunch. He's out of shape. He didn't come to camp. He's out of shape. So Brock Purdy is targeting Jawan Jennings, and you should be targeting Jawan Jennings on your waiver wire. This week, week 3, he had 11 catches on 12 targets for 175 yards and not 1, not 2, 3 touchdowns. 3. He was double moving. He was converting third downs. He was scoring touchdowns. He was getting deep. He did everything for this offense. If Kittle's out, if Debo's out, if Ayuk's out, any of these individuals at any moment, he is like a handcuff for the wide receiver position. You can plug and play him as a wide receiver 3 with upside if any of these guys in the receiving chain, in the receiving room, in the receiving depth chart of the 49ers are injured or missing, because he becomes a legitimate every down player for this offense, and he can do it at every level. He's currently wide receiver 4 in fantasy football. Wide receiver 4 overall, not on the Niners. Pick him up if you haven't already, please. The second player that you should target at wide receiver this week is Darnell Mooney of the Atlanta Falcons. Darnell Mooney was a player I always liked in Chicago, and I felt was a decent quality late round sleeper and best ball target. Mooney has proven the last couple of weeks that he has a rapport with Kirk Cousins. Week 1 was quiet, but in week 2 and 3, he's seen 7 and 8 targets the last 2 weeks. He's had 88 yards and 66 yards these last 2 weeks, playing against not bad defenses in the Eagles, if you watch what they did to the Saints, and then, of course, the Chiefs. So he has proven that he can step up, and he'll be probable number 2 option, the number 2 behind Drake London, because right now it feels like he's getting more targets, more work than Kyle Pitts. He's currently the wide receiver 31 in fantasy, which is firmly a wide receiver 3 in fantasy football. He's seen 18 total targets, 12 total receptions, 169 yards, and a touchdown so far this year. I like his downfield ability. I like his ability to line up in the slot or out wide, and I like his speed. I think he's a good football player, and he's growing inside this offense. The trust is starting to build. So I like Darnell Mooney as a target. If you need wide receiver depth, he feels like a guy that you can trust as your flex play or your wide receiver 3 on a pretty weekly basis, especially against good matchups. So Darnell Mooney, pick him up. The third wide receiver to target this week, this one is not going to be a favorite of many, but to me as a Patriots fan, I do have slight bias, but I also feel that this bias comes in handy because I understand the team better than most, and that's Demario Douglas of the New England Patriots. Now, Douglas had a breakout game on Thursday Night Football. If anything positive happened for the Patriots, it was that they intentionally tried to get the ball to Demario Douglas, and there was a reason for that. Douglas is one of, if not the best playmaker on the Patriots offense with the ball in his hands. Another development also happened in that Patriots game. Drake May got onto the field. 7 catches, 69 yards, 9 targets in week 3 for Demario Douglas. He barely saw any targets, despite being on the field as the slot receiver in New England the first 2 weeks. He barely saw any action in the first 2 weeks. But in week 3, he was targeted early, he was targeted often, he was targeted late as well. And with Drake May potentially becoming the quarterback down the stretch and maybe as soon as like week 5, I think that May is going to be more willing to throw Douglas the ball, more willing to get the ball down the field, making this offense more viable in the passing game for fantasy. Douglas is a talented player that can run routes and separate. He's dangerous after the catch. He had a low-key good rookie season, and to me, he is the most talented receiver on the Patriots. So if you're going to take a chance on somebody that you could stash that has PPR upside and maybe even a weekly floor with Drake May there, I could see this guy getting 6-7 targets a week just based on being the guy that can separate and get open on a team that's going to be trailing in a lot of games. He could be putting up a lot of receptions down the stretch of this season. So pick up Demario Douglas and stash him on your bench if you're in, I would say, a standard PPR size league. If you're in like a 12-man league, he should be picked up if you're not exactly stacked at wide receiver. Wan'Dale Robinson is a similar player with the New York Giants. Small, shifty, inside player that plays the slot for the Giants. He's seen a ton of targets this year so far. 24 targets this year, 15 receptions, 123 yards, and 1 touchdown. He's actually tied with CeeDee Lamb. I just bring up CeeDee, but there's a number of others. Just for the example, CeeDee Lamb was the number 1 wide receiver that was drafted in fantasy this year, right? Wan'Dale Robinson has the same amount of targets as CeeDee Lamb, 24 targets. So especially if you're in a PPR league, Wan'Dale Robinson is valuable. Currently the wide receiver 32, a wide receiver 3 in PPR. He's definitely worth a pickup. He's definitely a guy that I feel pretty good about putting in my flex. He's not going to have a very high ceiling in the Giant offense as the number 2 receiver, but he does have a decent floor. He's one of those guys that during bye weeks, if you have guys out, you could definitely plug in Wan'Dale Robinson, get a solid like 10 PPR points out of him, and feel good about your team. So Wan'Dale Robinson, a sneaky little addition to the depth of any wide receiving core in fantasy. And then my final wide receiver target this week is going to be Michael Wilson of the Arizona Cardinals. 13 targets, 11 receptions, 100 yards, and a touchdown so far this year. 9 targets, 8 receptions, 64 yards, all coming in week 3. Now, why he's interesting to me is he feels like he's the number 2 receiver for the Cardinals. He plays a majority of the snaps for the Cardinals. He plays out wide, but we saw him also play a lot more inside in the slot than in recent weeks for the Cardinals this past week against the Lions. And that was a development. So just keep your eye on that. He might not be somebody that you're necessarily adding this week, but you're definitely, considering him. You're definitely keeping an eye on him and watching him. And I feel like if you're in a deeper league, I'd definitely be picking up Michael Wilson because I think that this Cardinals offense is one that you want to have as many assets as possible. They didn't have a great game against the Lions, but I think moving forward, they look like a top 10 offense in football. So you want as many pieces to that offense as possible. Wilson is a talented player that many people like. I like as an overall guy that can release off the line of scrimmage, beat press coverage, run good routes, make contested catches. He's not the most explosive player, but I think he is a very nice complement to Marvin Harrison and Trey McBride, and that can be very useful in fantasy, and he could have some spike weeks down the stretch. So Michael Wilson in deeper formats is definitely a target at wide receiver. At the running back position, I'm going to bring him up once again. He should be gone. He should be gone. He should be not available after this week. So if he's still available for some reason, please pick up Braylon Allen of the New York Jets. If you have not picked up Braylon Allen yet, please do so. Because if Breece Hall goes down, Braylon Allen is an RB1 in fantasy football. It is that simple, and you want those type of running backs on your roster, even if you're not playing him. Maybe some people could play him as a flex, given that right now he's the RB25 in fantasy, which in a 12-man league is like the best running back 3 that you could possibly have, right? He's a borderline RB2 right now in fantasy, despite being the RB2 on his own team. That's how efficient and how effective he's been with the Jets this year. But more importantly, he's PFF's RB4 in terms of their grading, which means he's playing phenomenal football when he's been on the field. And if you watch him play, he's got the good feet, he's got great size, he can run you over, he can run by you, he's young, and he's like the youngest player in the league. And to me, has so much potential as an every down back in the NFL. 19 attempts, 96 yards, 1 touchdown, 8 targets, 6 receptions, 45 yards, 2 touchdowns through the air. So 3 total touchdowns, over 100 total yards as the backup in New York. If this guy gets on the field, if Breece Hall goes down, he becomes such a game changer in your fantasy league. So make sure you have him on your fantasy bench for now. The second running back that you should be targeting, if you didn't already pick him in your fantasy drafts, because I was huge on Rico Dowdle this year. I brought up Rico Dowdle pretty much religiously in every video, and so far it hasn't paid off. I will admit that. But this was more of the long game with Rico Dowdle, right? Rico Dowdle has just consistently seen more and more snaps through the first 3 games for the Dallas Cowboys at running back. He led all Cowboys running backs with 37 snaps in week number 3, 23 attempts, 88 total yards, 11 targets, 8 receptions, and 59 yards. He's getting a lot of work in the air. He's proven he can pass block. And he is the most explosive runner on this team as opposed to Ezekiel Elliott. So Rico Dowdle is somebody that I think he's just going to continue to get more play in this backfield. The Cowboys need explosiveness. The Cowboys need game changers. The Cowboys need to find a way to run the ball. And Rico Dowdle is the one that gives them the best chance right now. So if he's out there in your league, having the starting running back, the lead ball carrier on the Dallas Cowboys, is definitely somebody that you want to roster, because as soon as next week, he could become flex viable and potentially even RB2 viable. So definitely pick up Rico Dowdle if he's available. The third running back that's very interesting that might slip under the radar and should be available in every league, no matter the size, is Roshan Johnson. Roshan Johnson sneakily outplayed Khalil Herbert and DeAndre Swift this past week for the Bears. A Bears team that right now is reluctant to run the football with DeAndre Swift or any other running back. But we did see Roshan Johnson, 8 attempts, 30 yards, 4 receptions, 32 yards. Why that's interesting? This was the first game he really saw any action, and he saw a lot of touches. He saw 11 touches, 12 touches in this game. He was the highest graded Bears running back in week 3. Roshan is an interesting player because he combines really good power and really good size with solid quickness, not breakaway speed, but solid quickness, good lateral agility, and he can catch the football with soft hands. So he is a player that could play on every down. He is a player that could be relied upon to be a true workhorse because of his size and effortlessly smooth hand combination. So Roshan Johnson is a player that, just given the talent and the production that we've seen on a limited basis, he could actually outshine DeAndre Swift, because Swift just doesn't look very good, and Khalil Herbert might be too small to trust as the workhorse player. So he's definitely worth a stash to see how that Bears operation works out for the rest of the year. And given that Caleb's a rookie, this offense will ascend down the stretch. They'll definitely get better. They'll definitely improve. So Roshan is definitely an add. Next up, we have Cam Akers of the Houston Texans. I believe I brought up Cam Akers before, but if I haven't, I apologize. Cam Akers is a player that he was the starter this past week for the Texans with Joe Mixon out, and I think Dameon Pierce was also out of the lineup, so Cam Akers got some action, and Cam Akers has looked good in the limited capacity that we've seen him. 16 attempts, 53 yards, 2 catches, 11 yards, and 1 touchdown. Now, Akers also saw a touchdown, the only touchdown in the game against the Vikings. It was a real rough performance for the Texans, which is why you might actually be able to get Cam Akers this week on the waiver wire, because people are just not going to be impressed with his stat line overall outside of the touchdown, so you might actually be able to get him for less than he should go for. But Akers is a player that I would definitely be adding, because with Joe Mixon banged up and Joe Mixon potentially out, he's a guy that I would start in my lineups if I need a flex or if I need an RB2. Like, you can always use more running backs, and Cam Akers is definitely in a situation on a good offense with CJ Stroud, those receivers, that he could see red zone touches. He could see better game scripts in the future where he's running for like 15, 16, 17 carries. They were behind the whole game. He still saw 9 attempts. He still got a touchdown. So he's definitely an add this week, Cam Akers of the Texans. Bucky Irving Bucky Irving of the Bucks, we brought him up in previous videos, but he looks explosive every touch that he gets. And whenever the Bucks fall behind in games, he seems to be the running back that they turn towards, right? 9 attempts, 62 yards on the ground. He seems to be the more efficient ball carrier between him and Rachaad White, which might get him more and more work in this backfield. 2 receptions, 14 yards as well. He's a proven pass catcher even coming out of college. Irving is electric. Irving can make plays. So just for that fact alone, he's also got that contingent upside if his other ball carrier, the lead ball carrier in Tampa, does go down, Rachaad White, he becomes the instant, plug and play player, just like all these others that I've mentioned. Emanuel Wilson is the final running back target of week number 4. Emanuel Wilson, I want to say we've brought up as well. It's just that some of these guys like Irving and Wilson, they've had one spike week, a down week, a spike week. So we were not exactly sure what to make of it. But this past week, Emanuel Wilson had a great game. 12 attempts, 50 yards, 2 receptions. Whenever a running back has 14 touches in a game and a touchdown, you have to pay attention. And then you pay attention to Emanuel Wilson and the damage he's doing with these carries, with these attempts, with this work. And you realize that the depth in Green Bay is not too fantastic. So if Josh Jacobs does go down, or even if the Packers continue to be a potent offense that splits touches between Jacobs and another player, that other player is Emanuel Wilson. He instantly becomes a player that you want on your team, that has contingent upside, that is going to be a plug-and-play player and the starter for the Packers if Jacobs goes down. And he might even have flexibility, if you know what I'm saying, in deeper formats as well. So Emanuel Wilson has looked good in these first few games. I would definitely add him as the backup in Green Bay. The tight end position, I have 2 players at this desperate position, this volatile position that I think you should target. Cole Kmet was terrible at the beginning of the season. First 2 weeks, he barely saw any usage, any receptions, any targets. But this past week, he saw a significant improvement in terms of his snap share. So he ran 33.3% of routes on Chicago's dropbacks in week 1. Then it moved to 61.7% in week 2. And then in week 3, it went up to 71.4%. So continuously, we've seen Cole Kmet on the field more and more and more. That's a good sign. Cole Kmet is a good football player. That's just objective. If you've seen him play over the last couple of years, you would understand he's probably a top 5, top 15. I was mistakenly saying top 5, top 15 talent at this position, probably overall. But 15 catches, 128 yards, and a touchdown now. He had 10 of those catches this past week when Chicago went extremely pass heavy. He's clearly outproduced Gerald Everett, who is the tight end that was taking his snap share away. And he's clearly now being trusted again as the tight end 1 in Chicago. With the injuries that are happening to Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen, Cole Kmet becomes that next man up, working the middle of the field and getting open and available for Caleb Williams. So he's a sneaky addition at tight end. After last week, I think a lot of people are going to put a bid on him for sure, or definitely going to try to pick him up if they're desperate for tight end. But I think you really are warranted because of the snap percentage, the routes that he's running. He's definitely somebody that's showing he is worthy of being a potential tight end 1 for the rest of the year. Tyler Conklin of the Jets is probably not going to be a tight end 1 for the rest of the year. But if your tight end position is desperate and you need a guy that has a good matchup on a given week, Tyler Conklin feels pretty comfortable. Like, I liked him in drafts later on as a sleeper target because he's consistently put up receptions, consistently a PPR floor. He's going to be on the field pretty much every play for the Jets offense. And he had a good game against the Patriots. He had 5 catches for 93 yards. He was often being found by Aaron Rodgers on scramble drills, which shows that they have a rapport. And he saw 6 targets against the Patriots. He's only 14% owned, so he's somebody that should be available in a majority of your leagues. He's just a good player, a savvy player, not super electric or explosive, but somebody that I would start against teams that are weaker against tight ends. So look out for Tyler Conklin if you need a target at tight end. And we're going to finish with the quarterback position. Gino Smith does not have a ton of touchdowns this year, but he just looks aesthetically really good for the Seahawks. He's actually leading the NFL in completions with 77 completions. The reason he's leading the NFL in completions is because he's been accurate, on time, and the offense seems to be in rhythm through the passing game. But he's also attempting a lot of passes, which which is obviously great for fantasy. On top of that, he's actually QB9 in fantasy right now, which is definitely a QB1, right? If you're in a 10-man league or a 12-man league, he's a QB1 right now. 787 yards, 3 touchdowns, like I said. He did have a rushing touchdown as well, and he's shown a capacity to run a little bit more this year than it feels like in past seasons. But Gino just looks like a good quarterback right now. He feels like a top 10 player right now at that position in real life, and I think that's translating to fantasy with his receiving core, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith and Jigba, DK Metcalf. Any of these guys at a moment's notice can go off for 100 yards. So that makes Gino Smith definitely a startable player at a position that is not looking too pretty so far this year. And Sam Darnold leading the NFL, or at least tied for the lead in passing touchdowns, 657 total passing yards. He's also shown a little bit of an ability to scramble for 35 rushing yards, and he is QB2 right now in fantasy. Any quarterback that is showing that he can throw for 4 touchdowns in a game right now is a fantasy viable player. So Darnold is not somebody that moving forward I want to be starting every week, but if he's facing a nice matchup defensively, I definitely would look to start Sam Darnold, and I feel like as long as he stays healthy, the O-line stays healthy, he gets Hawkinson and Addison back, along with Justin Jefferson and Naylor, this could be one of the best offenses in football with Darnold at the helm, and that's just going to make for a very good, solid weekly fantasy performance. So Sam Darnold, Gino Smith, my targets at quarterback. 2 quarterbacks that are pulling the trigger accurately, efficiently, in good offenses with good receivers. Those are the players that you must add for week number 4. Thanks, guys, for watching. It's Mitch. Gronk spiked the like. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next week. Peace.